Hello everyone, welcome to a special emergency video on ISIS, the Quran and the Book of Peace. Hello everyone, this video wasn't scheduled for the 1 year life transformation challenge. However, I've been inspired to talk and to really get onto the issue. So many of my viewers and followers have been asking me questions about ISIS, asking me questions about Islam, and I can see by the content of their questions right now there's a huge manipulation of the world by many parties, really distorting the worldview and creating a lot of this conflict. So I wanted to address this in a video today, get a better understanding of what Islam really is, get a better understanding of what ISIS is, and work out how that fits into the human narrative and what we can really do about it, what the real solutions are. So as always, I'm going to begin with a quote, and that quote is, "Whoever recommends and helps a good cause becomes a partner therein, and whoever recommends and helps an evil cause shares in its burdens." Quran 4:85. A message of peace, saying that good is what we're here to do and bad is to be avoided at all costs. So I want to talk to you about how Islam formed, what Islam's about, what the Quran's about, and then ultimately what ISIL is about, because there's very, very different things, and understanding it helps you make better decisions when you hear the rhetoric coming out. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about Islam is a religion of hate and violence. I'm hearing people saying all Islamic countries are out to get Christian or Jewish countries, and I'm going to address those today and not allow politicians and mass media outlets to manipulate that message to get you angry, to create enemy states, to divide the world and then plunder its resources, which seems to be the agenda right now. So Muhammad, the Prophet, is the founder of Islam. He was born in 570. Now, he was a prophet, he spoke to God. Now, whether you believe that or not isn't a big deal, but he was considered by his contemporaries as a prophet. You could say Hippocrates in ancient Greek wasn't a doctor because he didn't have, a medical degree, but he was a doctor, and Muhammad was a prophet, and he would speak to God. He came from the Abrahamic tradition, so his tradition is very linked with the tribes of Israel. Many people forget that even though there is a massive, obviously, Jewish and Islamic beef that's been pronounced around the world, the reality is that Abraham is the father of Islam and the father of the Jewish traditions. So you actually have the same founding father. So both traditions look to the same person as their founding father, and as did Muhammad. So Muhammad came out of that tradition where his brothers were Jews and Christians. And when you read the Quran and you see how similar it is to the Bible and how similar it is to the Torah, I really am confused on how many people sort of put Islam in this too hard basket when everything they've learned their entire life about those Judeo-Christian religions is similar to the Quran. They would read the Quran and almost read it as if it was a passage from the Old Testament. So why have people taken the Quran and taken Muhammad's message as a violent, warmongering, hateful message? And I want to address that really quickly so we have a better understanding of the historical context of the Quran, because all information comes to you through the filter or the prism of culture, and those messages will always change. For the example, Jesus' message came through the filter of Roman occupation and the fact that a Messiah was needed to lift the Roman occupation, and that filter was used by many people to help understand his message. He would have given a different message in different circumstances. The Buddha was brought up in an environment where there was no occupation of an invading force. Therefore, his message was different to Jesus. Although the same undertones are there, the message was influenced by the conditions and the environment around them. And this is also true of Muhammad. So Muhammad the Prophet would speak to God and record his words. And during this time, you have political factions, you have groups, you have followers, and ultimately Mecca, which was the heartland of a lot of these conversations, got to the point where the council and the authority expelled Muhammad. As many religious prophets sort of get kicked out for causing trouble. Jesus was kicked out of the temple for, hammering the moneylenders. And ultimately, the message of peace that Muhammad was delivering and the conduit that he was for God was all about peace and love, and I'll get to that in a sec. However, there was a challenge in which and then ultimately to get religious freedom, just like the Pilgrims did on the Mayflower when they went to the United States, to get religious freedom, the followers of Islam, at the time the followers of Muhammad, were lived in a place called Medina. So they moved to Medina. Now there was conflict, and ultimately the city-state of Mecca attacked the city-state of Medina, and during this period it was a real challenge for Muhammad. Muhammad really needed to think about how do we deal with this conflict so we don't all kill, because ultimately we need to understand how love and peace can operate through the prism of conflict. Interestingly, we're trying to still understand that now. We have a world full of conflict and we're trying to see through that prism. So the conversations, passages and activity around violence that is associated to the Quran comes out of a very thin 10-year period in which there were attacks by Mecca on Medina, in which more often than not, the new religion of Islam had to defend themselves. And they had to defend themselves with violence. Ultimately, if people are coming to kill you, there needs to be some sort of rebuttal to that. However, that's a small, tiny part of the book which is dealt with. So 1500 years ago, that was all over. They dealt with the violence being associated and directed. And ultimately Islam won that conflict, and we are here today in this world. So during that period, the word jihad became a practice in order to protect the faith. So jihad, the word jihad means to strive, to apply oneself to struggle and preserve. So it's all about self-preservation. It is not about attacking first. So anyone who talks about these jihadists, or any jihad who says, I'm going to go out and blow up this building, that is not the correct use of jihad. That's the correct term for a murderer. Okay, so if you murder someone, you're a murderer. You're not a jihadist, I'm sorry. If you were practicing Islam and someone came to kill you because you were talking about the Prophet Muhammad, and in trying to kill you, you defended yourself and you grabbed the sword and killed them back, you're a jihadist. Now, how often does that happen? I'm not sure, but I think we really need to understand the difference between a jihadist and a murderer. Someone who goes out and kills people is just a murderer. Someone who defends themselves, who's being persecuted for having a particular faith, in this case Islam, is considered a jihadist. So, because they apply oneself to struggle and preserve. So we had the old jihad, which was the ability to defend Medina and to go back to Mecca. And then ultimately we have the new jihad, which is a manipulation of the word jihad, which is now a manipulation giving people the authority to go out and murder people. Now, the muftis who have allowed some of the jihads to continue use the context of the Mecca-Medina conflict and say, well, there's a new conflict now, and the conflict is between Israel and Palestine, who are Islamic, so therefore the attacks on the Islamic people of Palestine are therefore in need of a jihad. The allies of the Jewish are the Americans, the French, the Australians, so we can then perform a jihad against all these countries. It's very practical, and it's also very convenient that all these countries can now be attacked, because ultimately they're attacking the Islamic population of Palestine, so they're protecting their faith. Now, I think that's a long bow to draw, and I think that it hasn't been effective over the last 50 years. So I think some of those muftis need to think about the effectiveness of launching that jihad in a situation where it's more of a political land grab than it has anything to do with religion. Trust me, if you've got oil, there's going to be a land grab. It's been happening since the Normans invaded England. Land grabs for resources is what it's all about. We need to remove religion. We don't need words like jihad. So the reason I think the Quran is an incredible book is that I quite often say all my favourite stories about Jesus are in the Quran, and people look at me like I'm crazy. The word ISIS, so ISIS is the Islamic conversion of Jesus. The word ISIS is mentioned more times in the Quran than Muhammad. He's a major character. So when I hear Christians saying that Islam is a terrible religion, the Quran should be burnt, the main guy, Jesus, is in there almost as much as he in the Bible. So it's important to understand this background. This Prophet Muhammad was simply coming from the Abrahamic tradition. He was talking about Jewish commandments. He was talking about Jesus and Christianity. And then ultimately we have this religion that has now been totally manipulated by a group called ISIL. So ISIL is a political movement which has members who have used Islam as a smokescreen. Now, we should be aware of this ploy. I remember, well, I don't personally remember, but that in 1933, an organisation started taking power in Germany that talked about an Aryan backstory about this zeal, this religious zeal in order to help the white race expand around the world and take on anyone who didn't believe in them and to get more living space and resources. Now, we don't blame the Aryan cult for the Nazis. We don't. We blame the Nazis for the Nazis because they're a political organisation. But for some reason with ISIL, we don't blame the political organisation ISIL. We blame the religious context that it's in. You can see how ultimately the Nazis and the ISIL were political movements trying to get power, but leveraging off older stories. But we didn't blame the stories for the Nazis, and I don't think we should blame the stories for ISIL. People call ISIL a death cult, and they talk about the murders of ISIL, and I want to direct that. I want to handle that directly just with a quote from the Quran, which speaks for itself. Whoever kills a soul, unless it be for murder or for wreaking corruption in the land, it shall be as if he had killed all mankind. And he who saves a life, it shall be if he had given life to all mankind. That's from 553, the Quran, talking about when you give life and the connectivity of all of us. If you kill someone, you kill all mankind. When you save someone, you save all mankind. Now, recently people have been telling me that, you know, these Islamic countries are no good because they're going to force the infidels, force other countries to convert to Islam and to come to your country and convert you. I want to handle that straight from the book. The Quran 256, there is no compulsion where the religion is concerned. In context of there's no compulsion to convert people. The Islamic faith is something that's very important to Western culture. Quite often we have the West and then we call Islam the East. If it wasn't for the Islamic culture who protected mathematics, sacred geometry and the works of Plato, Socrates and Aristotle during the Middle Ages, we would have lost all that information. So Western culture has so much to thank Islam. Right now we're being hit with concepts of aggressive warfare. You know, there's people claiming under the banner of Islam to be attacking, and I want to handle it once again from the Quran, this amazing book. But if the enemy is inclined towards peace, do you also incline towards peace and trust in God, for He is the one who hears and knows all things, the Quran 8:61. So what we're saying there is that if your enemy wants peace, you must give him peace. Interesting, maybe Vladimir Putin and the Americans should look at the Quran and come from that angle, because if they quote the Quran and talk about these things, perhaps we can get a bit further, we can understand where our challenges are coming from. So what about terrorism? These sneak attacks that are exploding and killing people. We want to handle that directly because sneak attacks were directly handled by Muhammad. So sneak attacks were forbidden by Muhammad. Muslim commanders for as long as living memory were taught to give warning that war was imminent. They had to give fair warning. In fact, Muhammad gave 4 months' notice before one of his sieges. So you can see there that this sneak attacks, 9/11, no one knowing about it, that's forbidden by the Quran. So you can sort of see how we need to move Islam and the Quran over here and then move murderers over to here and not confuse the two. I also hear things like, but Brad, don't the Islamicists have a fundamental hatred of Christianity and of Jews, and aren't they out to destroy us, and we can never coexist? As long as Islam coexists, we'll never have peace. You know, and that's a lot of the rhetoric that's coming out of, you know, a lot of places right now. It's just not true, and I want to once again go to the book, go to the source, forget this filter, this prism of political aggravation and resource-hungry corporations controlling political puppets in order to divide people and to conquer them. Let's go straight to the source. Let's get the quote. The quote is from the Quran 5:69, "Surely that they believe, and those of Jewry and the Christians and those Sabaeans, who believes in God and the last day and works of righteousness, their wage waits with them and their Lord. And there shall be no fear on them, neither shall they sorrow." So isn't that incredible? What the Quran's saying is that if you're a good person and you do good things, you don't need to worry, you don't need to stress about Islam, because the forgiving, the all graceful God will look after you. So there is no conflict, and we're going back to the source here. This opportunity, this video, I didn't want to really touch on this subject. I was hoping that there would be answers, and unfortunately, once again, the political system has failed us. What we really need to step back, reduce the collective consciousness and the anger right now over the murderers, and we should go after the murderers and the political organisations, just like we did with the Nazis. We went after the political organisation, and then we went after Goebbels and Himmler and, you know, the murderers. We didn't make it into this worldwide global conflict between whites and blacks, because remember, the cover story for the Nazi regime was the Aryan race. You know, they were just doing the right thing for the Aryan race, and ISIL's cover stories were just doing the right things for Islam. Forget about it. rip that cloak off them and reveal them for who they really are, and then we can get to the bottom of this. But having a problem and hating people who are just like you, who are brothers and sisters and are doing it tough, some of them have food, some of them don't have food, some of them like the same music you do, is not assisting this challenge. Right now we need to understand, and we need to rip away all these convenient situations that are people using to divide us, come together and understand that we are much more like each other than we could ever hope to understand. I hope you understood this message, I hope you liked it, I hope that it resonated with you, and I hope you start to see the gaps in what you're being told and the truth, because I'm quoting direct from the source. Now, what other people are doing is they're putting their spin on it for their own political gain. You decide what's right. It's definitely something to think about. Until tomorrow, I'll see you then.